As you all know, I binge watch a lot on Netflix, but I was pumped for this man. Peter Berg, who I think is a good filmmaker, and a big Western limited series. It has all the makings for something special. Let's talk about it.
What do you think's out there?
The year is 1857. Pain is everywhere. Innocence and tranquility are losing the battle to hatred and fear. Peace is the shrinking minority. There is no safe haven in these brutal lands, and only one goal matters: survival. This is a fictionalized dramatization and an examination of the violent collision of culture, religion, and community as men and women fight and die to keep or control this land. Man, does that not sound like just a hardcore Western summary. And obviously this is rated TV mature for numerous reasons, but the most prominent one is violence. Unflinching, bloody, brutal violence. I mean, just the first episode alone. There is the sequence, and that's what I'm going to call it here, that catches you off guard. We'll call it the attack. It's one of the more brutal and cruel things that I've seen in a TV show in quite some time, because regardless of who we're following and what storyline we're on at the time, you never know what's going to happen next, and no one we are following is safe. And that's one of the cool things about this series, is it keeps you on your toes. Now, using the word cool was probably a poor choice of words, because it's tragic. In a way. It does showcase a few things very well. A lack of grace and empathy, obviously living in the mid-1800s. You are fighting for survival, fighting to survive. But some people in this show, and we'll talk about it here in a second, are fighting to gain wealth, to expand your territory, to own all of the land you possibly can. I think it's so crazy looking back at these times, how easy it was to kind of obtain the things that make you wealthy, right? Well, at least that's what I thought prior to watching this show, but there is a lot of violence that takes place between numerous groups of people, and there are a couple of storylines that we're following here. Now, Peter Berg does a very nice job of going back and forth, but there were times where I wish we could have focused on one or two things as opposed to spreading so much information everywhere and bouncing back and forth to these storylines. We start with a simple story, a woman and her son just trying to find her husband. Now, it's not simple, but it's probably one of the more simple stories of the bunch. You also have Governor Brigham Young. We're really, if you don't recognize that name, dealing with and hitting on the Mormon faith in this series. Now, Brigham Young may not be handled in this show the way that some Mormons will be happy with, but there is a realism and a groundedness to his character, but also he's wanting to expand territory, so at times you got to be a little bit ruthless to do that. Fort Bridger is your central focus here. You have Jim Bridger, played by Shea Whigham, who does just an incredible job. Exactly what you want him to play in a hardcore, gritty Western series is the character that you get. And of course, with coming in and taking land, you're going to have the indigenous tribes trying to defend themselves, but also those posing as tribes. I don't want to dive too much into detail because this is not a spoiler review, but there was a very interesting thing they did there, but also this brutality to where you understand a lot of the violence that is happening. It's not just senseless. Now, some of it's senseless. There are a couple of scenes where it's senseless. But for the most part, you understand why some feel the need to attack others. But this show also does a nice job of distinguishing those two things. Sometimes the violence just comes from the intent of being violent. And that's the ruthlessness of this show, American Primeval, that genuinely gets as dark as you could possibly imagine. I mean, the attack sequence that I referenced earlier, man, it's unflinching. I mean, across the board, it never lets you off the hook, and you are seeing some brutal scenes and sequences. Arrows going through people's skulls, people getting stabbed, attacked, scalped. I mean, everything you can imagine. So if you don't like a show that is very cruel in nature, I don't think you're going to like this. And I understand that. Also, if you're of the Mormon faith and you're watching this, you may not be happy with how some things are handled. You got the Mormon militia in this show, and they are, we'll say, committing some bad acts. Again, these things don't personally piss me off, but I'm curious to see how they are handled. But again, that's with a show like this that is willing to take these chances and make these decisions. Peter Berg is not a filmmaker that is going to shy away from that. More recently, his movies haven't worked as well for me. And then didn't he do the Battleship movie, which I thought was really bad? And so from Peter Berg to go from that to then your Deepwater Horizons, your Patriots days, and just that run of Lone Survivor, my God, that run of phenomenal films. Mile 22, which, it's something about him handling more of a truer, grounded story. Mile 22, I guess, was kind of, not very good. But this is a beautiful pairing. I keep using words like beautiful. Just know it's not beautiful because it's tragic. But in a way, it's beautiful that they're able to showcase this time period in this way. Now, there are some things about the cinematography and the Dutch angles and the presentation and the POV shots and just some filmmaking techniques used in this show that you rarely see in a Western. Now, the look of it, the color grading, the aesthetic, is very Western, is very timely. It takes advantage of its setting. The production design is magnificent. The costume design is fantastic. And you can tell they're filming on location. Everything you're getting visually is phenomenal. It's very stylistic, but I kind of enjoyed it the longer we went. But those camera angles and the Dutch angles and certain things, I'm like, okay, that's throwing me off. It took me about an episode to get there. And episode 1 in general it's scattered a little bit once we kind of diverge from that initial storyline with our mom and her child. But it inevitably finds its way back. And as this show continued to move along after the attack sequence, it slows down definitively, but it starts to pick back up. And I just love a show like this where you're just in the lives of these people. These numerous storylines. Dane DeHaan, by the way, is in this series. His wife gets abducted and he has to go through something absolutely tragic, but to see the emotion from that combined with what's happening over here with Brigham Young, combined with kind of our main character, played by Betty Gilpin, who has an interesting dynamic with Taylor Kitsch. How have I not mentioned him? Obviously a relationship with Peter Berg as a director, but I really liked him. Now, he doesn't say much in this show, but he handles himself in a way to where you first see him, you're like, this guy's going to be badass. I know he's going to be badass. And sure enough, he is the most badass human being in this series by a long shot. And there are times where Betty Gilpin's Sarah is kind of doing some things. It's getting on my nerves as a main character. I'm like, all right, if you just listen. She's a little overconfident in the beginning, which is respectable, commendable, but at the same time, it's like, you should probably listen. But when shit hits the fan, she understands, and Taylor Kitsch is like, I got this, guys. And sure enough, he absolutely does. So a great performance again. And as I'm watching this, I'm like, this kind of just, the overall vibe of it reminds me of something like The Revenant. Obviously, more unflinching Westerns back in the day, because we don't get a lot of these anymore. Even these Yellowstone spinoffs and What Territory on Netflix last year, very different, more Hollywoodized, less gritty, which I appreciate, but at the same time, it's nice to get something like this every now and then, and I'm seeing a little bit of a division from critics, not a super great Rotten Tomatoes score, and I'm sitting here going, I think I'm on the good side, because how often do we get a show that is so ruthless but gutsy? And I like the guts. But it also reminded me of The Revenant, and sure enough, it's from the writer of The Revenant, and I'm like, oh, all right, am I tying these together in my head? That was crazy when I found that out, because my brain threw me to The Revenant and just kind of the badassness of our, not our lead, but of Taylor Kitsch's character, and sure enough, from the writer. So, guys, this show really worked for me. Again, it's not going to be for everyone. It will piss some people off. Others will just not be able to handle the violence, and I get that, man. Like, my mom watching stuff like this, she says to me, I feel like my bones are breaking while watching, so she obviously, don't watch the show, Mom, but Dad, you'll love it. Before I give you my score, 6 episodes, so you'll be able to binge it for sure. If you like these Netflix reviews, you want me to tackle all of the series, I can. Dropping that thumbs up is the best way to let me know. I appreciate it. American Primeval is unflinching, often ruthless, and extremely emotional due to the constant fight for survival. This is a series that isn't for the faint of heart, but the consistent risk-taking inevitably pays off with a production that places you in the heart of the battle. And sometimes that's a scary place to be. Especially in this show that is extremely violent. But as a sucker for a good Western, folks, you don't get much like this on TV anymore. So let me know what you think. Recommend this to your dad, because this is a very dad show, but tell him to be prepared for something crazy. All right, I'll see you soon.